Good morning. Good morning. Didn't want to frighten everybody by shouting in there. My name is Amy Wilson, and I serve as the Managing Director in the Office of Inclusion. My pronouns are she and her, and it's great to see such a full room today for our session on DEI reviews. So I'll start with just a few housekeeping items, make some introductions, and then I want to share a little bit of context before we get started and really jumping into the nuts and bolts of DEI review. And now to introduce this awesome panel that we have here, I'll start with the person immediately on my left, Leah Coretti, who is the principal for Threefold Group Consulting. Leah and I met almost 20 years ago at Women Leaders in College Sports Institute for Administrative Advancement. And they always say when you have those experiences, you meet these awesome people you can go on life journey with. Well, here we are, Leah, which is awesome. And Leah and her team have been instrumental in helping us with a lot of our work in terms of project management. So our Optimizing the Senior Woman Administrator project and some others, this one. So just really valuable partner. And I also want to introduce one of Leah's associates who's sitting here in the front, Azure, if you'd wave, Azure Davey. Azure is a senior associate at Threefold Group and is doing a lot of work for us in this project on DEI reviews with Leah. And one of the things that she's doing that is critical to the work that we do is getting feedback from all of you, running focus groups, having conversations, and we're doing that right now for a resource for conference offices because that's coming, right? A review for conference offices. So welcome to both of them and thank them for being here. I'll now go down the line in order. Dr. Christy Bowers, Senior Associate Athletics Director, SWA, ADID at Boston University. So welcome, Christy. Thanks so much for being with us. Another person I got to meet through Women Leaders, and so a long history there. Next to Dr. Bowers, we have Leisha Lewis, who is the Assistant Athletic Director for DEI and the Director of Unitas at Villanova. And I was at a Big East meeting in January. Val Ackerman invited me to come and talk about some aspects of this. And I happened to sit next to Leisha, and that was a good choice on my part. So, and here you are. You sit next to me, and now you're on a panel. And so, and then on the far left, Richard Zhu, who is the Assistant Commissioner for Sport Management and Engagement at the Patriot League. When I started working at the NCAA 8 years ago, the person who met me at the door, who welcomed me, who onboarded me was Richard Zhu. I'm just going to say that you did. Richard also has run this inclusion forum a couple of times. So it's kind of a full circle moment for me to see him here as a panelist when he's been in the trenches running this. So Richard, welcome back, all right, in a different role this time. He told me last night with a drink in his hand that this was maybe a better way to do it. So we'll see. All right, okay. All right, so I'm going to set the foundation. Leah will take on really getting into the DEI review framework, giving an overview of it. And then we want to hear the real life examples of successes, failures, what's working, what's not, as we're all in this together and trying to move forward. And then, of course, I've done the introduction. So this is my slide. Sorry for the faulty moving there. What I'll say, let's just address the elephant in the room. I'm going to start with that. We are in a landscape right now with a number of things related to DEI at federal and state level that is changing every day. And I wanted to make a couple of comments about the NCAA perspective there. Some of you may not know this. We have a very small office in Washington, D.C., great group of colleagues there who keep track of everything happening in D.C. and nationwide when it comes to policy, legislation, everything government. They are tracking on bills, laws, wherever they're at in processy, and so we are paying much attention to this. I will also note, and this is from my supervisor, Senior Vice President Felicia Martin, that the senior management team at the NCAA is also discussing this. Many of you know, you heard him speak yesterday, we have a new president, and he's drinking from a fire hose right now in terms of how things work and where we are on those sorts of matters. And I'll also note that there was a lot of work done around the NCAA Constitution. You know, the NCAA, all of you, the membership, passed a new constitution. And out of that work, there are some ideas about DE&I. And let me give you one example from Division I. The Division I Transformation Committee said, you know, we have a suggestion that a group of people get together from the membership and think about what about having a person in every athletics department that their job is DEI. And some of you may say that's already me, but a lot of places you might be an athletics diversity inclusion designee but have 5 other jobs, or you may not have that in your title. So there's a committee actually unpacking that right now and what that might look like. So we're working through some things. So we have this DEI review, there's talk of a DEI position, there's other things that are all going to be impacted by some of the discussion and the laws that are happening. So I wanted to say that that's not lost on us. I don't have the answers yet for what this is going to look like, but it's just important to know that we're in this together and we're trying to navigate this terrain as we move forward. So I want to provide just a little bit of context for how we got here, because this legislation was passed pre-COVID. And I don't know if you feel like I do, but a lot of things that happened before we got into February, March of 2020 feel a little bit like a blur just because of the world that we've been living in. But the NCAA has had a gender equity task force since 2014. And that group was formed because there was a sense that there was some moving backward from some progress that we had made in the area of gender equity, more in the membership realm. As you all know, the national office has realized there's some work that needs to be done in championships and other areas that we're working on. So we all need to pay attention to our houses with that. That gender equity task force, one of the things that they noted when they came together and really started meeting in 15 and 16 was that NCAA certification went away in 2010. Do any of you remember if you were Division I, I got a few people who remember that. So from the early 90s until 2010, there was a really lengthy, in-depth, campus-wide certification process that Division I did. And it had a gender equity and it had a minorities component to that. And schools had to develop plans and action plans that were approved. D2 and D3, you did not have certification because you had in your institutional self-studies that were required by your divisions components in those areas. All right? So what the Gender Equity Task Force noted was there is nothing across Division I that is asking schools to think about this at all. And so they said, let's work on this. And in full transparency, the feedback I got from a lot of folks in my building when I started at the NCAA in 2015 was the membership has certification hangover, and they're never going to pass this really in-depth sort of study. So the task force worked on how can we get this back on the books, do something that would get folks looking at this again. So one of their recommendations to the NCAA Board of Governors was schools need to do DEI reviews. They need to be doing reflection and planning, and then what the information they're finding out, using that in their strategic planning for the benefits of their student athletes and all of those who work in the athletics department and beyond. So that's how we got this. And I will say this, the Gender Equity Task Force said we are gender equity, but what a mistake it would be to recommend everybody has to do a gender equity review. That's not enough. That's part of it, but this needs to be a full look at DE&I and all of the intersectionality of all identities. So the Board of Governors asked each of the divisions to think about it. It took Division I a couple of years, but they passed the required DEI review once every 4 years. D2 and D3 said, we're good. We have our institutional studies. D2 and D3 in this room might realize those institutional studies have now gone away. That just happened. So what's next? That'll be a decision if there is a next from D2 and D3. So I just wanted to lay that groundwork for how we got, where we are, all right? So I also think it's important to note when you do this review, the NCAA isn't asking you to turn it in. We've gotten lots of questions about that. What do we submit? What do we submit? You're not turning in the review to us. Moreover, you're not telling us what you're doing. It's very similar to the sexual violence prevention policy where your president, your Title IX coordinator, and your AD go in and attest that you have done education for your student athletes. Your president and your athletic director will do a very similar module. So I wanted to share that. And I will also say that it's really important to talk about the why here. What the Gender Equity Task Force and our other DEI committees that worked on this did not want was a check the box, right? We don't want that. We don't want it to be, oh, that's one more thing we have to do, and that this is something that is always ongoing work. It's why it's continual, once every 4 years, that you're building on it, that you're constantly learning, that we need this to be foundational to what we do, woven through our daily practices. And I said this yesterday from the microphone, if we're not developing cultures where our student athletes are seen, they're heard, they're valued, cultures of belonging where they can reach their potential, then why are we doing this athletics business attached to higher ed? I mean, I think that's a really important question, that we have to ask. And so that's why in our framework, a lot of the first steps are getting all the people who can, be part of this in a meaningful way at the table, and then looking at where are we? What is our why? What is our mission statement around this? Why do we do this, right? And doing some reflection there, right? The other thing I wanted to clarify is that there's been a fairly recent change. At the end of March, Division I decided on a recommendation from the Board of Governors to move the attestation date. All of you have been hearing August 1 over and over again. And here's why that happened. Sexual violence prevention attestation is the first Friday in November every year. They said, let's line all these up so that all the attestations aren't at a different time. So now, sexual violence prevention attestation, the education around that, and the DEI review will all take place on the first Friday of every November. So, this year, that falls on November 3rd. The conference office review for the first time is due in 2024, and the first Friday in 2024, we got the date up there for that one, all right? So just to give you a sense of why that happened, and it was really about alignment and making it easier for the membership. I did have a number of people tell me, hey, three more months would be of great help to us as we're sorting through this, especially the first time. Won't be perfect. There might be some parts of it you wish you could have done better or done more of, but if we can set some foundation there, it's something to build on. So with that, I'll turn it over to Leah to talk about the framework we developed. And before I turn it to Leah, I will say this. Step 4 of the rubric really holds what the Gender Equity Task Force knew that part of what they were doing was it has the parts about Title IX and ADA and all other things related to federal, state law, and compliance. That's there. In the room somewhere, I think they're back. I'll see if I can find them. Thank you, back over here. The Office for Civil Rights just released about a month ago a really excellent resource on Title IX and athletics. My office was working on one, and they called me and said, we just did this. And I'm like, all right, that's good, because it's exactly what we were working on. And it takes you through all the aspects of compliance. That's not in our framework, but it's a very helpful resource to have if as you're thinking about this as part of your review. So I wanted to point that out. And in addition, I know how important standards and metrics are. Just a comment about what our office at the INSTE can do. Unless directed by the membership, we can't set specific standards for you. We can give you frameworks and questions and things that will help you and hopefully guide you, but for legal reasons, for your campuses, we do have a place we can walk up to. So we're welcome to hear feedback about what will help you more, and I'm willing to push those lines as much as we can to help the membership, but we do have a place where we sort of stay there. So I also wanted to mention that as well. With that, I'll turn it over to my partner here, Leah, and thank you so much.
Well, thanks to Amy. Again, I'm Leah Coretti. I use she, her pronouns, and we already got a great setup about what is in the framework. And so I'll just say, ultimately, this is a tool to help campuses engaging in this review process know what should we be looking at, so examining key areas, and what are a series of meaningful questions we can ask to assess how the policies, procedures, operations, and outcomes in our athletics department are contributing to creating equitable and inclusive communities. So this is an assessment tool. The steps in the framework also prompt the reviewers, the review teams to engage in a thorough, collaborative, and proactive process. So the framework itself, and I have the PDF here, it's at the resource table. These are, we just ran out, just kidding. You can print them online. Yes, so they are available online as well. But ultimately, this is a 4-step process, and we will be talking about each of the steps with our panelists today. So the first one is about identifying collaborators and creating context. Not always easy, but incredibly important to this process is engaging and building cross-campus partnerships to do this work and do it well. Step 2 is all about your data. Step 3 is about all policies in athletics and then looking at those with the DEI lens. And step 4, Amy alluded to it, it's looking at those legal, institutional compliance and other formal responsibilities that come in this space. And it does end with a series of final action items that we'll look at the end of the segment. So within each of those 4 steps that we talked about topically, You get the specific questions to engage in, what is a meaningful conversation to help you assess this particular area. And then you're asked in each of the 4 steps to look at what are our strengths, what are our opportunities to improve, and what are items needing further study. So I think it's important just to make a really basic point about the difference between a review and a strategic planning process. And I love that Amy already used the language, where are we? So the purpose of the review is to answer that question. Where are we? And then what would be a really important next step from there is to say, where do we want to be and how do we get there? So the review is that first kind of step in the pathway, where are we? Strategic planning would come after the whole conversation around, so where do we want to be and how do we get there? But you can't know those second 2 things until you've done a good look at where are we now. So that's what this is all about. How do you find this since there's no PDFs in the hallway? Well, if you go to ncaa.org, you go to the inclusion page. If you hit programs and resources, it's, I don't know, I'm getting older because I met her 25 years ago. It's like 5th down, I think, is the DEI review framework. Okay, so we are really lucky today to have a panel of folks who have been engaging in this work. So we are going to talk a little bit about each step, but we're going to do so by hearing from people who have been using maybe not exactly this model. Sometimes they've used exactly items from here. Sometimes they've been working with other content experts to follow a really similar process. So we're going to talk about those 4 steps. But before we do, we're going to do some introductions. So we'll start with Dr. Christy Bowers and hear kind of in the 1 minute or less what work she has done in the DEI review space in the last year.
Thanks, Leah. Appreciate it. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for filling up this room today. I think it's a really important topic, and I want to reiterate first what Amy said is that this is a baseline. So when you look at this topic and you look at this framework, there's a lot of questions. So please do not think we have all the answers, but we are always available. You can always pick my brain, and I think that's where we can leverage each other in this moment. So in the last 12 months, sorry, not 12 years, I actually had the extreme pleasure of working with Inclusion Playbook to be able to do this, work through this framework and be able to collect this information and do some analytical analysis of what we have currently as policies and practices and people demographics that we're looking at. So we started with the Patriot League actually 3 years ago, bugging Amy and saying, hey, how do we do this? How do we do this? How do we do this? Richard will talk a little bit about that initiative, but about 12 months ago, we started to work with Inclusion Playbook to say, okay, how does this look from an SWA perspective? We were really the ones that were leading the charge on our campus to say, what does this look like on our campus? Who's going to be running point? How do we go through this collaboratively? And then when the framework came out, it was really in alignment with what the Inclusion Playbook was doing, and it was a really easy process. I wouldn't say easy, but it was a smooth process from there. So over the last bit, we went through the review, we went through kind of the deliverable from Inclusion Playbook, and then I've started strategically planning with our AD and our chief of staff.
Great, so we'll go to Alicia.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Leisha Lewis, and I'm the Assistant Athletic Director at Villanova, which I will say is a privilege. As I learn and meet more people who are ADIDs, I realize that's such a privilege to be in this role and have the focus to look at the DE&I review. When I came to Villanova, there was already an internal working document that established our goals, objectives, action items, and persons responsible for some of our DE&I work. It was a small internal working dashboard that I expanded to 16 goals. I will say that the drawback to that is that we don't have any metrics to support us and to hold us accountable to those goals. And so that hopefully will be an outcome of going through this review for us. So I was able to take that dashboard and also take the framework and create a document, a PowerPoint actually, to look at where we are in the process as it compares to our own internal working dashboard, but also what I know about the institution and where we are. From there, our compliance officer attended the NCAA convention and went to a session with Inclusion Playbook, who's been working with the Big East Association to learn about what is expected of us as an institution with this review. She brought that back to us. We came together as a collective group, and I established, our group is called Unitas, which is a Latin term for unity and community, but it's really our DE&I framework within athletics. I've established a staff within our athletic department. No one is paid and no one has a diversity officer designation, but we're working on that. And so I brought our compliance officer came to our group, came to our staff meeting, shared with us what she learned at that convention, and then we established a committee that included our compliance officer, and then with the hopes of bringing in experts across campus to help us with understanding data, understanding each step and each frame of this review. And we meet, and I just want to share that we started that, we established our committee, and we also established a timeline for meeting. And so we meet monthly to go over the review. So I've established this working document, and I have to say, and this is not to intimidate anybody, and I'm happy to meet with any of you to share with you what we've created, but it's 100 pages right now. Because you're looking at the entire institution within, and also looking at athletics. But this is, if you go through this step by step, it's a lot. And so just taking the time to go through each question and then thinking about what are we doing in this area. But I did that so that my working committee isn't overcommitted to the work. It's a lot. It's a lot for everybody to bring folks together. And it's a lot to ask. And so I created the document for us to work from. And when we meet, I ask folks to review that first, like the steps that we're going to review or talk about in our meetings. And then we talk about what are we noticing, what questions came up, what curiosities do we have, what more do you think we need, what more information you think we need to seek. And then we go through a SWOT analysis, which is similar to what is asked of us to do. And a SWOT analysis allows us to talk about what are our strengths, our opportunities, our weaknesses, and our threats to our work as it pertains to that one particular section that we're talking about. And I'll go into more, and I can answer questions about that a little bit later.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Richard Zhu. I'm Assistant Commissioner for Sport Management Engagement at the Patriot League, and I have the privilege of serving our 10 full-time institutions, including Boston University, also American University, and the United States Naval Academy, who I believe are attendees in the room. I will provide a little bit more perspective in terms from a league standpoint, in terms of how we could leverage the opportunity of the leagues providing expertise and also external assistance. And again, I had the privilege of working with Ashton Johnson and Leah Miranda of the Inclusion Playbook of how we could provide a framework and services for our member institutions in completing this required DEI review. Another component, hopefully I will share some perspective in the sense of how each of our institutions can utilize this respective collective league in terms of leveraging and influencing information gathering and perspective on our campuses.
Great. So there's clearly a lot of experience in the room, and Christy and Leisha are both well on the way through their review process. And so as we take a look at what is in step one of, again, the NCAA optional, just resource to help you get started. Step one is all about identifying collaborators and creating context. And I don't know if how many of you were in the session this morning about identifying barriers to DEI work and breaking those down, but I felt really kind of internally validated after sitting through that session about the importance of context. And so you can see the series of action items here, or really their discussion prompts, and the framework guides the user through some of these things. But we have some real world experience from Leisha to hear about when she was approaching this step, what are some of the things that went well, what were some of the challenges she faced, and maybe some tips she has to offer each of you.
Well, what went well for us in step one is that Villanova University is a mission-oriented, faith-based institution, and we're very transparent about that. And so when we're establishing context, that was, answering these questions was readily available to me from our Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, prior to me coming on the scene as the ADID, in Villanova Athletics, there was significant amount of time spent in establishing our DE&I framework from a mission-oriented standpoint, establishing goals, objectives, and then establishing some of our student-athlete affinity groups. And so all of that was already established and in place and also visible for us to find. And it's easy for folks to talk about our foundation, we do have an anti-racist task force on campus, and so all of that was transparent and accessible to us to put together and within our document. So that was, I think, the easier part of this review, honestly, because the information was available and people were really excited and happy to talk about it. You want me to talk about my what's challenging in the process? What's challenging is that time in athletics, it's 24 hours, 7 days a week. It's nonstop. And we're also, so this is more strategic work that we're doing, and we're very operational. And so our student athletes are competing. They are traveling, they are busy people, and we're following in them and we're supporting them. And we also have events and programs and things happening throughout this entire review. And so I would say that the challenge is time, and then for all of us, and we're all on different schedules, so bringing people together to actually engage in the review in a really thoughtful way has been one of the biggest challenges for us. Also, resources. The Big East has been supportive in helping us to understand that this DE&I review is coming forth and to bring us together to talk about what is needed and supporting us in how to engage in it. And then also providing the inclusion playbook, once again, to support us in as a resource, but it's discounted rate, right? Whereas the Patriot League, it was fully funded for this institution. And so I think that is a barrier to the work, and so I didn't realize that there was a cost to receive the support for somebody to take us through the review. And also, because I'm already situated, we can go through the review, but I actually need the inclusion playbook to help me with the strategic plan afterwards. And so I would say that's also going to be, it's a challenge moving forward. Let's see.
Can I add one thing to your challenges? So I think one of our challenges with this, the alignment piece, was institutional change, right? So we had a lot of turnover in our D&I office, and so we have a great strategic plan for 2030 for Boston University that has a diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts in it, but everyone was turning over in that office. So as I'm trying to go through this in the summer and trying to be ahead of it, knowing how busy our fall, to spring are, that office was hiring new people, and people were on vacation, and people were not necessarily engaging in that work during a timeline that kind of fit for us. So I think one of the challenges too is developing those relationships, and then once you develop those relationships, hopefully that human stays in that office so that you can continue to kind of collaborate with that office on campus.
I think you can go ahead and talk about what went well for you.
Yeah, I think what went well for us is I have a lot of support from our director of athletics. He embodies this mission and was really concerted about talking to me about executing this, right? Of how, what does this look like? I'm fortunate to also have a chief of staff who's very involved as well. So when it came to collaborators and trying to talk through what does this look like, I didn't hit any resistance about trying to identify and align in a mission in an institution that I've only been a part of for 3 years. I will also say we had a lot of support from the conference, right? And we're really fortunate. Our SWA group is very active. We have a group chat that we talk to each other almost on a daily basis, if not a weekly basis. So that collaboration across our 10 league schools, even though we're very different, right? We have military institutions that have very strict DoD guidelines. That support, that collaboration, that questions of like, hey, how are you doing this, was really important to our success with getting this framework completed.
So just a final thought from me on step one is, identifying collaborators. There is a lot of work to be done in this process if you want it to be really thoughtful and the most effective. And athletics tends to be really siloed. So to what extent can you put yourself out there, approach other groups that have expertise, that have information that you need, and to engage them formally in your review process is really helpful. And then to look at to what extent does your full team of reviewers or collaborators reflect all the populations that are significant to you in your DEI review. So we've got some prompts along those lines in the resource that you can see. And another word about timing, we've already identified timing as a challenge. I know that the first round of this is due in November. Can you pull this off between now and November? You can pull something off between now and November. You can meet the requirement. I would say if you're trying to put yourself in a best practices position, it's probably a 1-year process to really engage, really address each step. So maybe we're just in okay, I'm going to get it done by the deadline this time, but as you're thinking ahead structurally to what could this look like moving forward, it probably is a 1-year process.
Can I speak to that a little bit more?
Please.
Just structurally for us, I mentioned that we meet on a monthly basis, but I found that in step 2, we needed more time. And I do think giving the extension for the deadline, thank you so much for that.
Division 1 voted to do. I didn't.
Oh, okay. Well, what a blessing, because we were sort of rushing through, right? Like, we want to get through this, and I don't think that's in best practice. And so that was, time was a barrier. However, that allowed us that the timing changing came just in time, because we're stuck on step 2 still. And so we're able to take 3 months just looking at step 2. We're meeting monthly, right, trying to maximize in our time. But now we have the flexibility to do that, to take the time that we need to gather the information to help us further understand what is needed, where we have strengths and weaknesses.
Great, so that's a perfect segue to step 2. And this is all about your data. So you can see here, it's about looking at your demographic data of athletics and your broader campus, the trends in outcomes, educational career outcomes for both your student athletes and your staff, climate in the department, and then how are you using data related to DEI? What are you collecting? How are you using it on a regular basis? And so really appreciate that your IR offices may be able to help you. It may or may not be difficult to begin to build bridges with that group, but that's certainly, again, a reason to engage a broad-based team in this effort. So before I turn it back to Leisha, I just want to say when we put the resource together, we had this debate whether we put the look at all your data step before or after the look at all your policies step. And if you notice here, there's a focus on outcomes. So not only who's in your population, what do you look like, but what is happening to people as a result of your policies and the way they're being implemented. And we decided to front load that. So this thing about, what are the ultimate experiences of the student athletes and the staff, to know that as you walk into that review of all your policies through the DEI lens. So that was purposeful, and I'm going to turn it back to Leisha to talk about all the fun she's having in step 2.
Well, prior to going through this review, it was important to us to think about how are we going to assess our athletic department that will lead us into a strategic planning process. So we were already in that mindset. A part of that mindset was to develop relationships and partnerships across campus. So we had already begun that work. I had already begun speaking with our Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion to ask about our 2019 DE&I climate study that they engaged in. I was already in conversations with our Office for Strategic Planning because they established the surveys to make sure that athletics was included in the surveys. What I found in those conversations, is that in the DE&I climate study that was conducted at Villanova in 2019, it was difficult to aggregate the data by athletics. So I could not see how our athletes were experiencing Villanova or experiencing their time in athletics because there were no questions a part of that survey. So when they engaged in the next climate review, which happened this past winter, those questions were already implemented. So beginning those partnerships and those conversations had already started for us. So that was one of our strengths. Also, We have established a relationship with our career services, recognizing that our minoritized student athletes were not engaging in our really robust and vibrant career services department. It's excellent what they are doing there, but our student athletes were not engaging. So we had already begun having conversations with them about what can we do about that. And so when I went to them to say, now I need help with gathering data, I can't find it anywhere, that helped bringing them into our monthly meetings. And so they were tasked to gather data and then bring it. But I also was asking them, I forgot to mention our academic advising department within athletics is separate from athletics. So they are under our provost, under the college, but situated in athletics. And so they also have data in respect to graduation rates, GPAs, retention. But once again, that data isn't aggregated. So I was asking them to aggregate it by students of color, first gens, students who are Pell eligible, and gender. And I'm not sure if I'm remembering all the different areas, variables that I was asking them to look at, but I wanted that data, right? So not only the data that exists, but I want it aggregated so that we can see how our minoritized student athletes are experiencing Villanova. And so there was the ask, and those folks, some of those folks were able to come to our meetings, but they weren't coming with the data. So that's the challenge, which is separate from step one, is the Villanova is very careful about who they're sharing data with. And they're very careful about data that's transparent to not just to our external community, but even internally. And so that was something that we uncovered in the process. Also, something that we uncovered in the process is our senior exit surveys. How many of you do those in athletics, the senior exit surveys? So we recognize that the process of our senior exit surveys, which could give us some data in respect to qualitative data in respect to how our student athletes are experiencing athletics, is flawed. The process is flawed. And through this review, we were able to see that, which was really helpful. And just having those conversations and just asking the really important questions as it pertains to equity.
Great, and I think Christy had a few comments too about the process of finding all the data.
Yeah, I think one workaround, and I echo the institutional research can be a challenge, and you would hope that everybody trusts you with having that data. But one workaround I've found is actually asking for a smaller chunk, which puts more effort on your end. And listen, I have 17 titles. We were joking a little bit about how many titles and how many things I do. So I'm not saying it's the easiest process, but I have been able to engage institutional research in giving me partial data and then taking the EADA report or taking other reports and kind of putting that data together to give me a fuller picture. So a lot of times you'll find that demographic data is highly protected and they really don't want to give you that information, but hey, we have to turn that into the NCAA every year, and so can we grab that self-reported data from our student athletes in a different way and then merge the two data files? So there's definitely ways around it. I'm not saying that it's the most streamlined process, but if you're hitting roadblocks with institutional research, get creative in how you can kind of put those two things together, maybe a different report that exists that you can add into the other report to be able to get a full picture of what you're looking at. I think the other thing I would say is that, when we were thinking about how do we collect all this data, one thing that we didn't do really well is pulling in all of the pieces of the puzzle. Like we didn't think thoroughly on how many conversations do I need to have to be able to get a holistic picture, right? So we have senior exit interviews, we have annual surveys. We added belonging questions into our annual surveys. Do you feel like you belong here at Boston University? What are things that we can do in our department to help you build community? So thinking about not just that snapshot after 4 years, but maybe annually, because then you can kind of add that into your strategic short-term plan there. So different ways to incorporate not even just the review of data, but also when you see that review of data, don't wait for the strategic plan to put those in. Seize that moment of, hey, we added this in right in the fall. We knew in the summer, we were missing this piece, and I wasn't going to have time to get to the full strategic plan, to the AD, and get it vetted and everything else. But I said, hey, listen, this is a chunk that is really important when I go back to this strategic plan. Can we add it now? Can I capture this now for this year in 22, 23?
Great. So as a result of needing to collect the data, it sounds like we identified kind of data collection processes to upgrade, never mind just DEI work. So another kind of side benefit. All right, so step one was setting the context, looking at mission, structure, big picture, why is this work important to us? Step two was all about data. Step three, then, is about policies and, probably more importantly, what's actually happening, so practices. And as you look at this list, it doesn't say DEI policies. It looks at your really significant policies that are very people-focused, and it asks you to examine them for their impact on DEI. And so you can see the list here about hiring, recruitment, professional development, staff support. That's a very significant section. And then your educational efforts related to DEI topics. So it's everything you do examined for its impact on DEI. And Christy's going to start us off.
Yeah, so I want to remind you, this is a baseline, right? So this is a very hefty section. And so this is a time to I think there's some things that you're going to naturally do in your department that can build some momentum, right? And momentum is really important. So the data can bog you down a little bit. So this is an area where you can kind of take a deep breath and say, you know what, there are some things we're doing really well. So once we had collected that information, we kind of leaned into the department and asked a lot of questions of who was around us. So when we were submitting things, again, we use the inclusion playbook. So when we were submitting things and looking at this framework and saying, okay, what fits in these boxes? What's our partnership with women leaders? How do we use them as a resource? What's our partnership with MOA? How do we use them as a resource? What's our partnership with WeCoach? How do we use them as a resource? And so we had these holistic conversations about what does hiring practices look like, not just as administrators, not just as the SWA who's hiring different areas, but as coaches. Where do you post your job for an assistant coach at Dobo? How do you look at, how do we get the word out there? What does your network look like? How are you building that network ahead of time? So we had to ask some hard questions, and I think there's people in our department, I walked into a senior staff meeting and charged everybody with, don't tell me that your network is 3 people that look like you, right? So broaden your network with 4 to 5 people. Introduce yourself the next opportunity you have for professional development to find 5 people that you have not met and maybe don't have the same career path as you, because that network is so important. When we looked at that hiring practice to say, hey, we're missing some pieces here, and it's not making us as diverse of a department. It's not making us as collectively effective as we could be. So I think those were some good things we found, some great challenges, but also some opportunities where we could say, hey, you know what, we are doing some really good things, and here's some momentum of where do we take it to the next level. So that was kind of the hiring. I don't have an expertise in DE&I work. This is a passion of mine. This is something that I take time to become educated in. And so I also leaned into others when it came to collecting information. I made phone calls to peers and said, hey, can you help me, right? I made phone calls to Richard Zhu and to Inclusion Playbook, and I'm like, how do I do this? What does this look like? So be humble, right? And it's okay if you don't have all the answers, but ask each other for that help. Natalie at American is our only institution that has a DE&I person in that position. And I called Natalie, and I'm like, what are you doing? What does this look like? I called Army West Point. I'm like, what does this look like for you? And it might not be the same at each institution, but it gives you a baseline to say, what am I missing? What could be in here? What maybe should be in this bucket that's not in this bucket? How can we examine our HR practices and our hiring practices? And the last thing I say that is a challenge was on campus, you'll find that your HR processes are pretty fixed, right? And there's certain things that you have to go through. So moving that needle, I think, is a challenge for us. As we started to talk about how do we have a statement that we encourage minority individuals to apply to positions, that hit a hurdle on our campus of, well, then we need to standardize that across all departments, and then we need to do this, and then we need to do that. And we're like, okay, well, I don't know which we're going after first politically with this, but how do we make this happen, and what does this look like, and what are steps that we could do, and start at least having that conversation, even if it's 4 years down the line when our institution says, hey, yeah, we can do it.
So I think in that response, we hear that not only has Christy looked at the key questions in this area, but they've also started to walk up to that next phase, that where do we want to go? How might we get there? So you can catch the scope of, what's included in these questions and hear the opportunity for some really significant conversations to happen on campus to move the ball forward. So, Leisha, did you want to add on policy and procedure, or should we keep going?
I was just going to say, excellent job. You're doing a great job. We're not there yet because we had to spend 3 sessions on step 2.
Yes, fair. So we heard in Amy's intro some references to Title IX and other legal requirements. And so what I will say is that step 4 is an important step in this whole process. It's also one that's really focused on process. So it says, with your general counsel, make sure you're looking at how you're meeting your obligations. And those fall in a variety of areas. Amy alluded to the elephant in the room of different environments people are facing with state policies, kind of really primed for change in some places. And so this really is about process. And the framework attempts to outline, here are the categorical things you should be thinking about. And because it's so different from place to place, you really need to rely on some of your local legal expertise here. So anybody on our panel have anything? I think we just said this is probably one we're all in different places right now, and just to acknowledge it's a moving target, but you do have responsibilities in this space, and so to make sure campus conversations are happening is really important.
And I'll just add to that is, when I created the document, I went through each step. So when we started our process, we brought in our legal office to say, this is the direction I would like to go in with this review. Should you sit at the table every single meeting, or can I pull you in for step 4? So we have already consulted with risk management. We've shared the review, the framework with them. They've been able to look at that, look at the document that I've created so that they're prepared to come in, hopefully, with perspective from these different areas. And so once again, that's just establishing a partnership and an engagement with folks across campus.
Please.
I just wanted to note this is great stuff, and it made me think of some questions that we've been getting. You may go through this at one time in a process. We've also had some schools reach out and say, we didn't realize Division I passed this in 2019, and in 19 we brought somebody in and we did a gender equity review, or we had somebody come in and do a climate study in 2020. Anything you've done in the 4 years contributes to this in different parts. So I wanted to be clear that you get to decide what you use, who you use, and when you use it. I think there is some real true value in it being a unified process, but that's an important point as well. We had some schools thinking that something they'd done 2.5 years ago didn't matter and they had to start over, and I'm like, absolutely not. This is comprehensive because there are 11, I say 1,100 schools because we know Division I has to do this, but we wanted this to be available for D2 and D3 schools as well. This is important for all of us, whether it's required or not. So I just wanted to make that point. Thanks.
So we talked about the review is taking stock of where are we now. And then these 6 items, which are really small, putting the framework into practice, this is still not strategic planning. This is priming you to go to that middle step. What do we want to look like? Where do we want to be? And then you would finally follow up with, so what is our plan to get there? So this is taking what you summarized in each step, doing the master list of strengths, opportunities, and really importantly, especially if you're just starting now and you're going to hit that November deadline, items needing further study identified during the review. You're all going to have them. Some of you may have a lot of them. That's fair. But to record those and then have attention paid to we need to go sort these things out is really significant. What are the most significant strengths and opportunities? How can we use this information to do that goal setting? And then you're starting to walk up to that planning process. And then really importantly, communicate the findings of the review and celebrate progress you're making to enhance visibility of your efforts on campus. So we are lucky to have conference office representation here. Actually, before I go to that slide, we want to ask Richard his perspective from the conference office, who's been really at the forefront of acknowledging the importance of DEI review work. He's had a chance to observe 10 schools go through a review recently. So we wanted to hear a bit from Richard about themes he saw, where he saw opportunities to overcome challenges, and then he can also follow up with how conferences can help schools with the DEI reviews.
Great. Thanks, Leah. Again, from the Patriot League standpoint, we have a diversity of institutions, including 2 service academies, 4 liberal arts colleges that focus on the undergraduate experience, a massive research university in Boston Metropolitan, AAU, and then along with 3 master's comprehensive universities. So trying to identify a framework that works for 10 unique institutions can be challenging. And so we have the privilege, at least within the Patriot League, of time, because we had these conversations starting back all the way back in May 2018 with our senior women administrators, of how we can operationalize and develop a baseline for these DEI reviews. Fortunately, we had Amy join us several times over the years, kind of talking about the various progress related to legislation. And I think one of the unique opportunities, but also a challenge with the DEI reviews, is the opportunity for the latitude. Again, the legislation is roughly 2 sentences long. However, with that latitude comes the question, how do we operationalize and develop this into a specific framework for our campuses? So again, through mid-year of conversations across our conferences with our SWAs, our ADIDs, our athletics directors, we, in essence, at least started with a baseline around a few questions related to gender equity, Title IX compliance, diversity, equity, inclusion policies, along with programming that's offered on our campuses. And it was kind of a natural evolution through our anti-racism efforts with our Anti-Racism Commission that we submitted out an RFP to external consultants across the intercollegiate athletics landscape that focused on DEI subjects. Fortunately, Ashton Johnson's team at the Inclusion Playbook were able to provide an RFP that actually, in essence, identified 3 specific areas for our campuses, in essence, to evaluate. That actually works straight in alignment with the frameworks that Leah and Azure have developed for the membership, and it related to demographics data, the policies within our athletics departments and within our greater institutions, on top of the practices and opportunities that are provided within our athletics departments and institutions as well. So, if you have the financial means, which again our council presidents within the Patriot League did commit to, we were able to bring an external consultant, Ashton and Liam were able to join us and provide, in essence, a survey tool that provided an input of demographics data from our campuses, a range of institutional policy snapshots. And the beauty of bringing an external consultant is they bring out, in essence, a deliverable report that all of our campuses could utilize in terms of really tangible best practices and recommendations on our campuses. Understanding the uniquenesses of these conversations and the opportunities could differ from military academy to a 4-year undergraduate experience.
I just want to add one thing with Richard. I think the Patriot League heard us, right? So we're all sitting in a room as SWAs saying, how do we do this? We don't have enough time. How do we do this? Like, we want to do this well. And we're listening to Amy come in and say, hey, here's what this looks like. And we're listening to Leah and Azure come in and say, hey, this is what this looks like. And we're like, I don't know how to do this with all the gusto I want to do it. So I think one lesson, if you're sitting in this room and saying the same thing, I don't have the time and I want to do this really well, go back to your conferences and leverage your collective unit to say, we want this values to us. This is of value. We need help. Because when 10 people raise their hand and say, we need help, your conference listens, and then your presidents start listening, your ADs start listening. And so don't be afraid to kind of leverage your collective unit and advocate for yourself, because likely your other institutions that are in your conference may feel that same way.
Yeah, another thing to add in terms of the reality is we're all kind of walking into the abyss of what do these DEI reviews actually entail on our campuses. And so the reality, in essence, the best structure from a conference office standpoint is at least defining a baseline set of criteria, subject matter, areas, because at least then that becomes, in essence, a starting point. Because the reality is our ADIDs, our SWAs, our senior administrators on our campuses, you already are all so busy. To provide at least some level of baseline for our conferences or our conference institutions to utilize, at least was the first point, and then utilizing the expertise outside of athletics, which is valuable, Within athletics, we sometimes think we know all the answers. We do need to bring expertise outside to leverage these and move these important discussions forward.
For the Big East Association, we are working with the Inclusion Playbook. We're working with Ashland Johnson, and I think about half of our institutions are working with Ashland. We are not. I hope to, towards the end of all of this, to help synthesize the information that we're gathering, we'll work with the Inclusion Playbook. I think one of the barriers, though, is the financial barrier, and so I just wanted to point out that the Patriot League, I just want to emphasize that they resourced and funded all of their institutions throughout this entire process. And so one of the things that I wish I had done, and it's not too late, is go to my institution to say, can you fund, right? Like it's not all on the conference. I think the conference is helping. The conference has allowed us to have a discounted rate with the Inclusion Playbook, but the president's office, who has to sign off on this, should also fund the process. And so I just wanted to put that out there, that that's a step that I'm going to take that I had not considered before.
Yeah, one thing to add, I think when I said the 10 institutions, so our ADs and presidents were the ones that were like, yeah, absolutely, spend this money, right? Because they get jurisdiction over how the conference spends money. So I think that's how, again, if you're advocating for yourself, we need help. Like we want to do this really well, and we don't have the capacity. So how can you help us?
So as we kind of address the financial part of, it would be great to hire out work in this space, but most of you will not be able to do that. And so I'll remind you of what is in the framework. It is a suggestion of how you could go about this work. Do you have to exactly answer every single question with 10 paragraphs? No. But this can help you. If you say, I want this to be meaningful, you can look at when Amy's team of content experts talked about what are the important areas to look at, what are the important questions to ask, you have that. And so you can guide your team through those conversations. It does take some time, but it might be in the first iteration of your review, you have a lot of those, we need more information, this feels premature, and that's fine. That is a picture of where you are. So you may be finding yourself doing this without a hired consultant to do a lot of the labor with all the expertise they bring. And this is meant to be a guidebook. It's not you have to follow every letter to make it meaningful. You will sort that out, and you have to kind of meet it where you are. So as we work to conclude this session, there's two more things to do. One is talk about the fact that, Amy said the conference requirement in Division I is a year away. Azure and I are working with Amy's staff to develop the next version of the resource, which is conference focused. Now, the interesting thing about conferences is they have staffs that have a workplace that you want to make sure is inclusive. They also have member services with a really wide reach that you also want to make are inclusive. So when it comes to how we look at where we are, we really separated those two items. So we're looking at both experiences, and instead of 4 steps, there's 3 steps. So there's still the important need to set context and identify your team and who's collaborating at the top. And then it's really focused on what is the impact of your conference policies and practices on the experience for those who work there. And then what's the impact of all that you're doing as a conference, as services, championships, contracts, everything. What is the DEI impact kind of for your membership? So that is coming. I'm hoping to have maybe a 2-minute Q&A here in just a second. But the last question for our panelists, we're going to end with another lightning round of 1 minute, is just to comment on the benefits to your institution or to your conference of engaging in the review process.
I think again, I'm not traditionally trained. My higher education degree is in teaching. It's not in diversity, equity, and inclusion. That framework was huge for me to kind of understand comprehensively what do I need to know, where are my blind spots, how do I go through this. So I think it's been incredible to kind of have this as a resource to use content experts from the NCAA to say, hey, these are the things I should be looking at, these are the questions I should be asking, and these are the things maybe I need to ask more questions about.
I think I mentioned this before. We were already in this process, but just thinking about what your aspirations are for your DE&I work within your institutions, but also what are your desired outcomes. And so for me and for our athletic department, our desired outcomes are to create a culture, well, to change culture and climate so that we are inclusive and anti-racist. And so working toward the strategic planning process and using this as a guide is helping us get to that desired outcome. And so that's important to think about, and I think you mentioned it earlier, Leah, is what is our why in this process? And so that's our why, and so that why is driving our purpose and it's driving our energy to become a better place for everybody. And so this has been really, I was spinning my wheels thinking about, I was looking at our internal dashboard. I was like, how do I hold us accountable? And then how do I actually work on the dashboard when I have no time? And so this framework, and also just having a deadline, honestly, for me personally, was really helpful because it I just put my, my feet to the ground, and I was like, all right, I got to get my hands dirty. We're doing this. We got to do it. There's no pressure because you're not asking me to present anything. So let us do it in our way and do the best that we possibly can because of our aspirations and our desired outcomes.
My boss, Commissioner Jennifer Hippel, and I talk a lot in terms of, from a league office standpoint, it really is a partnership between the institution and the league office. And one of the pieces that has come up actually a lot in a lot of these conversations related to DEI reviewing these topics on our campuses is utilizing the league and the conference and the NSA as, in essence, leverage. Because for a lot of our institutions, some of these discussions related to race and ethnicity or LGBTQIA+ or gender equity topics may be challenging in essence to bring up within an athletics department or broader campus community. However, the beauty of the Patriot League and the conference is utilizing that as the example to bring up, have these important discussions. And so the beauty of being within the Patriot League or the NCAA is the concept is, again, it provides a requirement for you all, for all your campuses, if there is difficulty or challenges acquiring certain information like data or just establishing buy-in. And so really leverage the strength and the collection of the Association of Schools within your like-minded peers.
Great. Well, I want to thank my panel and all of you. I managed to go to 11:16, so I'm hanging out. Azure will be here. If you have any questions about how to use the institutional resource or what you would love to see incorporated into the conference version of the resource, we really want to talk to you. So we're going to hang out over there. But for anyone who doesn't have to immediately walk out, are there questions for our panelists? Yes, in the back. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yep.
99.9% of us probably are not trained in this work.
Yep.
But I can tell you, this is a real statistic. 100% of those that evaluate us are not trained in evaluating us.
Yep. So the question was how do we support and educate the person leading the review? Well, and the other comment was your bosses also are not DEI experts. So what I would say is,
Our bosses are not DEI experts. Our bosses and a lot of times are DEI ignorant. There's a difference.
so really significant gaps of expertise. What I would say is, I think I maybe said 3 times, step one, on the one hand, it's the easiest. On the other hand, it's the most important. Who you ask to join you, you are prompted to go on campus and arm yourself with DEI expertise by who you ask to join you. And Amy said, the NCAA cannot put out a review standard in this space. We're trying to help you ask good questions. And so, it'll say, is this thing happening in a significant way? Is it meaningful the way you're doing this? You will need people on your campus who can have a good sense of right or wrong, up and down in the DEI space. Otherwise, you're going to have a hard time getting to kind of that next step of what should we do to move forward. So it's very important to be intentional about who you bring on your team, because the expectation is you will probably not have the content expertise, but someone on your campus probably will. In the back.
To be honest, Thank you. One of the other partnerships that, if you have them on your institutions in regards to data and data propriety, I don't want to share. I work a lot with, if you have federal programs, federal granted programs on your campus, they have to report and collect demographic information. They have to do comparative analysis within their grant writing about students in particular programs who have identities. And I make great relationships with those offices because I may not be able to get what I need from an IR department, but I can go to my student support services, who's part of TRIO, and they're collecting the data on non-TRIO and TRIO eligible, along race, along income eligibility, along all of those things, and are often interested in slicing that data in a lot of different ways because it helps them do their work as well. So they may be great partners to reach out to.
Yeah, and there's one other resource I want to remind people of, the IPP data, institutional performance data that is available. I would highly recommend, if you don't know how to get access to that, NCAA does, so they can help you, and you can come talk to Amy, but that is very helpful as well as far as benchmarking, seeing where you're at. A lot of that is, again, has to be turned into NCAA, so it's an easy ask to grab that stuff.